Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at another low-cost smartphone. This is the TCL 10L. It comes from the same company that makes those low-cost TVs, and now they're putting their displays into smaller devices like this one. And we're going to be taking a closer look at what this phone can do in just a second, but I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that this came in free of charge from TCL. However, all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, nor is anyone reviewing or approving what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get to it now and see what this phone is all about. Now, the price point on this one is $249. I am very impressed with the display on it. It's a 6.53-inch display. They call this an LCD Notch. It's not an OLED display, but it looks really good, even though it is not. And I think one of the benefits that TCL brings to the mix here is that they have been making low-priced TVs for a while. The display is excellent. It looks much better in person than it does on camera, actually. Super bright. Really, really nice display to get on a phone at this price point, and this is really my favorite feature of the phone, is its big display. Very thin bezels on it, as you can see. There is a camera notch here in the corner, so you can see that right up there. But overall, I am very, very pleased with how nice this display looks, especially given that it's not an OLED, but looks pretty close to some of the OLEDs that I have seen on more expensive phones. So very, very happy with this one. Resolution is 1080 by 2340, so that's full HD and then some. And you're getting about 395 points per inch when you're looking at text on screen. So it's very easy to read text on this. The screen is nice and wide, but not too big. And overall, I am very, very pleased with it. The phone itself is powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon processor, a 665. It also has 6 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigs of storage on its base model. You can also add a micro SD card to the mix as well. Now, the carrier compatibility on this phone is a little more limited than a few of the other phones I've looked at recently. This one comes unlocked for the price tag. It works with AT&T and T-Mobile here in the US. It will also work on Verizon Wireless, only though in LTE mode. So if your carrier has 3G CDMA towers somewhere, it's not going to work with the 3G towers, only the 4G LTE towers. And this is not a 5G phone. So you're going to have probably better luck with AT&T and T-Mobile versus Verizon, but it will work with Verizon provided you only use LTE towers in your travels. Weight on this one is 6.35 ounces or 180 grams. The screen here is glass, of course, but the backing here is plastic. The battery inside is a 4,000 milliamp hour battery. This does not support fast charging, and even though it looks like you might be able to put it on a wireless charging pad to charge it, it won't support that either. So it's nothing fancy when it comes to charging, but the battery life on the phone is very good. We easily got through a full workday using it moderately, checking email every once in a while, watching a few YouTube videos, making a call or two. Generally, that kind of usage will get you probably right through the workday and then some. If you stress the phone out a little bit more, playing a lot of games or perhaps wandering a little too far away from your nearest cell phone tower, that might impact battery life a bit. But I think for most casual users in good range of a cell phone tower, this should give you very good battery life, and you probably won't need to charge it until you get to the end of your day overall. So good battery life there. There's a USB Type-C port here at the bottom for charging. Note that this is a USB 2.0 port, even though it's a USB-C connector, so you're not going to get super fast data speeds through it, but it's good enough for plugging in memory devices and other things that you might want to connect to that port. You cannot get display out of it, though. It does have a speaker here at the bottom that actually sounds pretty good, but it is a mono-only device, so you're not going to get stereo out of this unless you plug in some headphones to the top of it. You do have a headphone jack up there, so that was a good thing to see. On the left-hand side of the phone here, you've got your SIM card tray, and then you have what's called the Smart Key, and this is a button that you can configure based on how many times you press it, essentially. So you have a single press option here. You can go into the menu here and decide what you want the button to do. You've got a whole bunch of things to choose from, like turning the flashlight on or enabling the camera. And then you can set other settings for a double press and a long press. So if you wanted to have maybe the Google Assistant launch with a long press, you can set that up. And right now mine is already set to do that. So if I hold it down here, that will enable the assistant to pop up. So it's nice to see that little button on there, and it's good to see that you have some options for configuring it too, which was nice. On the other side here, you've got your power button and your volume rocker. On the back of the phone, you've got a ton of cameras, which we'll go into some more detail with in a few minutes. Over here, you've got your fingerprint reader, which does read pretty quickly. So if I turn the phone off here and just rest my finger on it, you can see it loads up pretty quickly here. So nice, quick, responsive fingerprint reader on the back of the phone. And that is pretty much it here for its aesthetics and hardware. So let's dive in now to the camera system. We'll explore what all of these lenses do and what the photos look like, and then we'll take a look at performance. Now on the back of the phone here, you can see we've got 2 flashes and 4 cameras. The first camera here is the best one. It's a 48 megapixel sensor. It looks pretty good, and we'll take a look at some image samples in a second. Next to it is a depth camera. This is used for portrait mode to figure out where the background ends and your subject begins. Next to that, you've got a macro lens for taking super close-ups of flowers and other high-detailed objects. And then on the end here, you have a wide-angle lens for getting more of a scene captured in your photos. And then the front camera here is a 16 megapixel selfie camera. So let's take a look now at some image samples we took with all of these cameras, and then we'll also take a look at its video quality too. So let's begin with this photo here. This was shot in high pixel mode, that 48 megapixel option. And as you can see, it's got a lot of nice detail here that looks really good. So I was very pleased with this out in a nice bright day. The photo looks pretty good. Now, one thing you're going to notice here at the bottom is that it was putting a watermark on my photos, which I was not happy with. Apparently that is something that is rectified in the most recent firmware update that they've brought to the phone. But if you are seeing that, you can disable it here by going into the gear icon and then scrolling down to watermark and making sure that's turned off. After the first over-the-air update that comes down for this phone, that will be off by default. But the only problem here is that the logo is getting baked into every photo. So make sure you disable that if you haven't already installed that firmware update. But again, I would just check to make sure it's off before you start taking some important photos. Nonetheless, though, I'm very pleased with its outdoor quality. I took a few other shots here. Today it was a very overcast day, so you can see what that looks like. I did notice that it tends to oversaturate a little bit, so that green is a little bit greener than I would like, but of course you could dial that down a bit in software after the fact. So that was one thing I noticed there. Another shot here looks pretty nice. You can see we've got some good detail on the grass here as well. And then I took a couple of other closer shots here. This is just a flower outside. Again, this is not the macro mode, but the 48 megapixel feature here. And again, I'm very pleased with the overall detail that we're getting on a relatively low-cost phone. And low-light photos look pretty good on this too. You're going to get some graininess, but the camera does do a pretty good job of pulling out as much detail as it can in a low-light situation. And I was actually pretty surprised to see how good the low-light stuff was on this camera. Now, you do have to do a little bit of work, though, to get the best quality images, because by default, the phone is going to give you a 12 megapixel image, which doesn't look bad, but if you want the best, that 48 megapixels they're advertising, you do have to go over here to more and enable high pixel mode, and you can then take your pictures at the full resolution. As you'll see, though, it does take it a little bit of time to shoot that image. I'm finding that the image is getting shot, but there's a processing period in which the image gets written to the phone, and during that processing time, you can't take any more pictures. So just keep that in mind as you're looking to play with this. The default mode is 12 megapixels. The 12 megapixel mode, though, as you can see, does shoot a lot quicker. So if you want to get a lot more rapid fire shots off, I think leaving it in the 12 megapixel mode is probably the way to go. So let's take a look now at portrait mode. It did a very nice job pulling out the foreground from the background here, as you can see. A nice clean break there and plenty of detail too. So it looks really good for a low-cost phone. I was very pleased with that. We have a shot here in portrait mode also out of that rear camera of my 2 daughters. One of them making her usual funny face at me here. She was questioning why I was shooting photos of her with this phone. And as you can see here, there is a little bit of issue with the hair. And this is something that most phones have problems with, so we're not going to ding them too bad on that. So it is getting a decent separation here of her from the background, especially here at the top. But down there you can see it's not blurring out that portion of the background that's behind her hair, and that's often very difficult for these phones to do. But by and large, it's doing a pretty good job here for a low-cost phone, and I was very pleased with how well it did do here, so no problems there. So that was good. Now, I was not that crazy about the macro lens on the camera. According to the specs they sent over, it's only 2 megapixels, which was surprisingly low, especially in this day and age. And if you're trying to capture detail, you certainly want a little bit more resolution than that. So as you can see here, the image, although it's focused, doesn't really have the level of detail we saw in that high pixel mode. There's a good amount of graininess that you can see here as well, partly due to its lack of resolution. If we take a shot that we did in a much brighter, sunnier day, you can see it looks even worse here. Just a lot of grain and noise, again, due to the fact that it's a very low resolution sensor running off of that macro lens. So this is an area where I would suggest going into that high resolution 48 megapixel mode, getting as close as you can get to the thing that you're trying to pull detail from, and then do a crop and zoom after the fact. Those images will look better than what you're going to get out of the macro lens here. And that was a big disappointment because it was kind of cool to see a macro lens on a smartphone, but unfortunately this one just doesn't have the resolution. And the super wide lens here will give you a 118-degree field of view versus 79 on the other high resolution lens, so you'll pick up a lot more in the scene. But this wider angle runs at a lower resolution of just 8 megapixels. But the images don't look bad, and if you're trying to pick up a wider field of view, that lens will certainly do it for you. Now, to activate that wide angle mode, you do need to push this button right here to switch to that lens, and you can see you get the wider field of view after you do that. Now, the selfie camera is in the upper left-hand corner, and watch what happens when I hit the button here. It'll put up a little light around it, which I thought was pretty cool, so you know where to look, because a lot of phones, of course, have that camera in the middle, and you'll want to be looking at the left-hand side here to get the best results of the camera's output. The camera isn't bad. It's 16 megapixels, so the quality of the image is pretty good. You can see my hair needs to get trimmed a bit here, but the detail is good on it. There's also a portrait mode, and I just kind of let it run on auto here just to see how it would do. So it did a pretty nice job here getting her out of the background there. It's doing it all computationally, so we'll have a few little hair issues and whatnot here. You can see it kind of softened up the hair after her ear. It also softened up her skin tone as well. Now you can turn off all of this automatic stuff if you want, but I do think it looks pretty good here for an automatic shot. So let's take a look now at its video quality. Out of the high resolution lens, you can go up to 4K at 30 frames per second. The video looks pretty good, although it does jump around a little bit as the camera is panned around here, as you can see. Some of that's due to focusing, but I also think some of it might be due to the electronic image stabilization, which you can turn off. But overall, the image quality isn't bad here. Now you can also shoot video out of that super wide angle lens, but that one maxes out at 1080p at 30 frames per second. So for the highest quality images, the high resolution sensor is going to be the way to go, and again, that one maxes out 4K at 30 frames per second. Now, if you're curious as to what the differences are between the standard lens here and the wide angle lens, you will see that transition there to get a feel for what it looks like and what it picks up. Now, as I mentioned, this has electronic image stabilization and not optical stabilization, so it's going to give you a bit of flakiness here, as you can see, if you are walking and shooting video at the same time. So my advice would be to disable that feature and try to lock the camera down whenever possible, but it will try to do its best to straighten out the image a bit for you when you're in motion. And there's a few other fun things you can find in the camera app, including a stop motion feature where it'll take a shot every 8 seconds, and you can do some cool things like catching the sunrise here, which I thought was pretty neat. So for the price point, not a bad selection of cameras here on the back, although I would have liked to have seen more resolution out of that macro lens. And then, of course, you got to do a little bit of extra work to get the full advertised resolution out of the high-res sensor. If you just shoot on auto, you're going to be getting 12 megapixel photos, not 48, but the 48 is in there if you push the right button. So let's move on now to performance, and I was very pleased with the overall performance of the phone here. Everything is very snappy and responsive. Web browsing is just fine on it. The screen, again, looks great for reading, and they have a special reading mode you can switch the screen into to adjust the color temperature slightly for less eye strain. Altogether, the screen here is the best part about this phone, and you'll have no problems there whatsoever. Apps here load up very quickly. We saw YouTube a little bit earlier. Everything is just super snappy and responsive, and altogether from a performance standpoint, you shouldn't have any issues running any Android app on this device. Let's take a look now at some games. We'll start with Call of Duty. So here we are in Call of Duty, and you can see what settings the game set itself to. And we'll jump out into the game here. It seems to be running at a really nice frame rate here. Graphics look very nice as well, so really no problems here running this game. And we tried a bunch of other casual Android games on here too, and all of those seem to work just fine. Let's take a look now at the Dolphin emulator, which emulates the Nintendo GameCube. That can be a little bit more demanding. Let's see how it does. So the Dolphin emulator appears to be pretty playable here. It's not quite full speed, but it's doing better than I expected it to. The audio doesn't sound great. It's choppy and breaking up a bit, but the game is almost playable here. I'm pretty close to 30 frames per second, I think, playing the game right now, and that's not bad for a low-end phone. But you'll do better, of course, on more expensive phones that we've looked at here on the channel. But I think you'll be able to emulate a lot of popular consoles from the 80s and 90s on this without too many problems. And I was actually surprised to see how well it did for the price point. And on the 3D Mark Slingshot gaming benchmark test, we got a score of 1,764. Of note here is that this phone is performing about the same as the more expensive Pro Edition of the TCL 10 phone. Also of note, this is coming in right where the Motorola One Action did, which is another low-cost phone that at the moment has the same price tag as this one. So altogether, a decently performing phone. Again, the big story here is the display. And what's neat about these low-cost phones is that typically the manufacturers focus in on one feature that they really put some effort into. In this phone, clearly it's the display. Some phones focus on the camera, so it's really a matter of what you're looking for. But the performance is here. I think if you do look at your phone screen a lot throughout the day and you watch a lot of media on it, this is a great choice, very affordable, and a pretty nice device here, and there's really not much to complain about on that front. The camera system could be a little bit better on it, but again, I'm not going to ding them just given how well the phone looks and feels overall. So that's going to do it for this look at the TCL 10L, and until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold-level supporters, the Four Guys with Quarters podcast, Tom Albrecht, Rick Vestudo, Chris Allegretta, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/s.